Good evening, Dungeon Masters. I'm Baron Ropp. Playing online D&D is at best a less fun experience, but how much of this diminished fun comes about because we're hoping to replicate an in-person, at-the-table experience? Don't get me wrong, in-person gaming is definitely the most enjoyable way to play D&D, but one can't help but recognize that there are a lot of overlooked problems with the D&D rule set that expose themselves when we switch to online play. Even further, we're probably tied into a certain style of game that doesn't translate well to a Zoom call. So if we want online D&D to be more fun, we need to adjust the way we play the game to better suit this alternative medium. Firstly, in-person D&D's cross-table chatter is what the Brady Bunch experience is most lacking. Whenever the party's wizard lollygags until it's their combat turn to select which spell they're gonna cast, the rest of the table can engage in side conversations while the wizard player and the dungeon master are engaged in legitimate game discussion. Unfortunately, this parallel side chatter simply can't be done online without interrupting actual gameplay. As a result, players who would normally slake off boredom by engaging in small talk instead reach for their cell phones and turn off their mic and camera to go fold laundry. Worse still, the amount of time these players disengage is exponentially longer for each other player in the game session. Not only must the dungeon master handle in turn each player's actions separately, but they must also provide a synopsis on repeat of the prior turns due to each player's lack of focus. So how do you fix this? There are a few solutions I'll talk about, but the easiest is to play with smaller groups. 3 players and a game master is what I would call the maximum for online D&D play. This allows you to spend more time with each player because you have fewer people in the game. In essence, the more time you spend with each person, the more engaged they are and the faster the story moves on. It is unfortunate, but we kind of lie to ourselves when we say there are these 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition: combat, exploration, and social interaction. The problem with 5e is that almost every single class ability, gameplay mechanic, or magic spell has to do with combat. There's very little depth for social interaction or exploration, and the rules that do concern them usually just handwave them away. Any scientific analysis of the rules proves D&D is more similar to a board game than a storytelling medium. So one option to fix online play is to lean into that. Get rid of anything in your adventures that doesn't make your D&D game session look like a beefed up version of Gloomhaven or Hero Quest. Start your game at the entrance of a dungeon, give your players a contrived one-liner about why they're on the quest, and roll initiative. Keep the players in that turn order throughout the entire game session, even when combat is not upon the players. Further, have players push tokens around a virtual tabletop and get the players used to having short but engaging turns as they explore the dungeon. This round-by-round board game action reinforces D&D's core mechanics while also keeping the players engaged due to their constant interaction with the virtual game map. So what if you want a more social or exploration style game that reflects the other 2 pillars of D&D? 5th edition system is still a problem here. Spells and abilities like suggestion or the explorer character background largely washes away the most interesting parts of those pillars. So the solution is get rid of 5th edition. If you still want the D&D feel, I can't recommend Old School Essentials enough, effectively a polished reprint of the D&D's 1st edition from the mid-70s. Its publishers even provide tools like online spell and monster lookups, as well as treasure and random encounter generators. The tools almost match the quality of D&D Beyond, and it's entirely free. Alternatively, you can roll with even more narrative systems like Fate Core or Blades in the Dark. However, if you need to meet your 5th edition players in the middle, 5 Torches Deep is a good compromise. Your players will still have the 5e feel, but won't feel the super thick combat crunch that makes 5th edition problematic for theatrical style Zoom games. But this does lead us to another issue. When we were playing 5th edition, it made sense to use a virtual tabletop. The virtual tabletop, therefore, was our visual aid, and we still need that. Ironically, the way D&D was packaged and sold during its second edition has the solution. Back in the 80s, TSR used to publish with their adventure modules easel-like books that partially unfolded and stood up, facing two directions, toward the players and toward the dungeon master. The DM side would detail a particular dungeon area, while the other player-facing side depicted the location players were exploring. The presented illustrations painted a more clear picture for the players as they negotiated their way through the story. We can replicate this by screen sharing from a bank of images in our game notes. It takes some time to find and organize the right images, but it pays massive dividends in player engagement. Every time your players go to a new dungeon area or town district, or every time they fight monsters or interact with NPCs, screen share some artwork depicting what those things look like. When your players have something interesting to focus on outside of a poorly lit Brady Bunch, scrolling through one's Facebook timeline for the 47th time becomes far less alluring. So ratchet up the tension of your online games and turn your session into Hero Quest on steroids, or focus on social encounters and exploration while showing off your NFT collection. Thanks for watching, Dungeon Masters, and until next time, good night. Oh, and one last thing, tell everyone to get good microphones, for crying out loud, please. Gosh.